Any objection? Seeing none, we'll make the request. Thank you. We'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 226. Amelia, will you give us an overview? And thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 226 relates to income tax and would allow a Kansas itemized deduction for certain losses from wagering transactions beginning in tax year 2025. The bill would amend KSA 7932-120 to allow losses from wagering transactions to the extent allowable pursuant to the Federal Internal Revenue Code as a Kansas itemized deduction for tax year 2025 and thereafter. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Senator Ware.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. What kinds, can you give me a description, some for instances of the kinds of situations where these itemizations would be allowable?
So if I may, Senator, I think we might hear some of those from the conferee. He can give us some examples and yeah, okay. We'll get to that.
Thanks.
So thank you. Any questions on the language for the bill? Thank you, Amelia. Committee, our first conferee is Jason Watkins. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Watkins here on behalf of the Wichita Golden Circle. Appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of this bill. Madam Chair, just by way of a little information for the committee, the Golden Circle is a facility in Park City, Kansas. It's just north of Wichita. A few years ago when this legislature authorized sports wagering, you also authorized historic horse racing machines. And the Golden Circle will open in December of 2025. It'll have 1,000 historic horse racing machines. We'll also have simulcast of horse races. We're in support of this bill because we think it's a matter of tax fairness for the folks that will come out and use our facility. Prior to the tax cuts back in, I think, 2012, gaming losses were deductible against your winnings. So just to be clear, if all I do is lose, number one, that's not going to be any fun. But if all I do is lose, there's no deduction. Okay, I can only deduct against my winnings. And the revisor is nodding her head in agreement, which always makes me feel good. So I wanted to give you an example, and I can get this to the committee. I just came up with this morning, so it's not in my testimony. But just as a hypothetical, let's pretend it's a leap year. So we have 366 days. Every day I gamble $100, and on the even days I win $100. On the odd days I lose $100. Okay, so after 366 days, I will have won 18,300. I will have lost 18,300. I will pay taxes to the state of Kansas on $18,300, even though through all these transactions, it's zero. I lost exactly the amount that I won, so the total sum there is zero. But I'm still going to pay tax on $18,300. If I did that in the stock market, you would tax me zero. If I did that in the crypto market, you would tax me zero. But if I do that in gaming, you're going to tax me on that $18,300. So the majority of states that have legalized wagering of some form allow you to deduct against your winnings. There are some limitations in states like Colorado. They put a cap on it. There's other states, the percentage that you can deduct comes down based on your income. But again, this is something that Kansas allowed until the 2012 tax cuts. This was a pay for that plan. And when we basically rescinded those tax cuts, we put some of those pay-fors back into the tax code There are others that we did not. And Madam Chair, if I can answer the senator from Wichita's question, this would be just all types of wagering. If you went and played slot machines at the Kansas Star and you lost, this would allow you to deduct against your winnings. If you came to our facility in Park City and bet on the Kentucky Derby, which you will be able to do once we're open, if you lost, you could deduct that against your other gambling winnings. So I hope that answers your question. If not, you can follow up with me. There was a I haven't seen the fiscal note on this bill. There was a fiscal note in the House. They have a kind of a companion bill to this. And we've looked at that. We're having a hard time kind of making sense of that. So I told the House committee, regarding that fiscal note, we'll take the under because we think it's high. So with that, I'd stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jason. Committee, any questions? So I didn't know there was a House companion bill for the conspiracy theorist in the building. I know there aren't any. This is actually a couple of women constituents who had requested this legislation. So it wasn't a lobbyist in the building. It's just people that like to go gambling on the weekend and they can't understand why they cannot deduct their losses anymore. So, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm struggling with this bill because I'm struggling to figure out kind of what the public policy that we're trying to get at or that we're trying to reward or that we're trying to incentivize. I mean, usually when we do stuff to our tax code, we're trying to incentivize certain behavior or trying to provide a benefit to certain groups. I just don't really I'm struggling to see if somebody wants to go gamble, that's great. If they incur a loss, I just struggling to see why we want to create a more favorable tax structure for people who want to do this at the expense. I mean, I look at this bill and all I really see is $15.8 million less that we're doing in property taxes, which is really what my constituents have expressed to me that they really want to see this session. And the budget is tight. We have limited resources.
We're not working the bill.
So I'm just asking you, explain to me the public policy behind this, why this is a great thing for the state of Kansas that we should do over other kinds of tax relief.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I appreciate the comment question from the senator. First of all, you as a matter of public policy have legalized gaming in the state of Kansas. In fact, the state of Kansas owns and operates casinos. You also, as a matter of public policy, have decided to tax what somebody makes when they win at a casino or a gaming facility. I think by virtue of those two things, it is appropriate public policy to allow an individual to deduct against their winnings. You're not encouraging gambling, but you have legalized it in the state. You are taxing it. It seems unfair to say, well, we're going to tax your winnings as a matter of income because you've decided that gaming winnings are income. I think you'd have a hard time pointing to any other type of income that you tax that you don't allow a deduction on losses against that same type of income. So that would be number one. Number two, in terms of the fiscal note, I was trying to be funny by saying that we're taking the under. We just wholeheartedly disagree with that fiscal note. Keep in mind, you have to have winnings in order to have a deduction against that. So in our view, that almost becomes a zero-sum game. And in terms of we just don't think it affects the budget like that fiscal note says it does. So your concern about property taxes, we share the concern with property taxes as well because we pay them.
Senator Clem.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate your comments. The fiscal note that's in here, is that the fiscal note from the House, or is this our own fiscal note?
Thank you. Eddie, do you mind?
The note in here is the one for this bill. The numbers are the same in the two fiscal notes.
So the 15 million is, okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
Senator Ware.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So you made kind of an equation between stock market and other investments and gaming. But isn't there like the calculations made by the person in stock market or investments? They're not just randomly hoping that chance is on their side that time, whereas in gaming, in large part, it is. If you're at the roulette wheel, you know. So I do see a difference between those, and I can see why there might be a different result.
Yeah, appreciate the question, Madam Chair. I think there are plenty of folks that wager that might have a little different opinion. There are people that I think probably have more confidence going to a casino and playing Texas Hold'em than they would playing the stock market. I know how we define gaming, and it's a game of chance, but if you look at Texas Hold'em, why is it always the same people that make the final table in a tournament? That's talent. They know how to play that game. Now, roulette, you should never play that.
Any other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I tend to agree a lot with my colleague from across the aisle, ranking member. On this, I see this as incentivizing bad behavior, but I question. Most gambling is done with cash. At least I guess it is. I don't do it. I don't gamble. If you don't play, you don't lose. But how would someone keep track of how much money they actually invested in gambling? The winnings are kept track by the casino, I'm guessing. But I also don't understand my understanding is if you go to a machine, you put cash in, you get cash out. As long as it's not at a certain level, you stick it in your pocket and walk out, nobody knows you won or lost. So I guess I'm trying to figure out the mechanics of how this would work.
Yeah, so it depends on the gaming facility, but if you have a player's card and you set that down at the blackjack table or you put that in the machine, the slot machine, that can track your losses as well. I mean, you can get reports on that.
But if you do not, how do you keep track? If you don't have one of those cards, if you occasionally go gambling, you say, hey, I'm going to go celebrate and lose a bunch of money on my birthday. But I actually win, or that other person actually won. Okay, so maybe it's something that can be figured out, Madam Chairman. I just don't see how the mechanics would work, other than I do understand that your regular gamblers who lose a lot of money that could be better used for paying utility bills, buying groceries, paying for a lot of things. I got that, but I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics of how it would work.
Senator, do you have a question? We do have two other hearings.
Yeah, no, I just, he didn't answer it because he doesn't have an
Mechanics,
answer. So.
I'm sure would be much like it was when the legislation existed before.
Okay, I don't know
This
what
is
that is.
not new legislation. It's bringing back previous legislation.
Okay, I guess I'll have to get educated on what we had. I didn't realize we'd ever had it.
Yes, we did have it. It was sunset in 2012, along with the mortgage and quite a few, and health. There were quite a few pay-fors in that bill that caused major heartburn for people. I'm not saying this is one of those, but yes. Thank you. Committee, any other questions for Jason? Seeing none, thank you,
All
Jason.
right, thank you, Madam Chair.
So we do have an opponent, Nick Reinecker. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nick Reinecker from Inman, Kansas, and I oppose this bill. As a taxpayer, I'm sensitive to the current environment under this dome with disruptions in committee and whatnot, so I'll try not to allow my emotions to win the day. But I am angry, and I believe I have a cause, not just with this bill, but the system of state-owned gambling that is being allowed and enhanced and broadened in the past, and also, with the blessing of the federal government, and that this bill would affect. So as we talk about problem gambling and addictions fund, a lot of money goes to other things besides problem gambling. And my tax money is being spent for advertising the growing of a state business of gambling and not abating it, but condoning this behavior and using language like gaming to lessen the stigma. And I won't go into any other issues that I come up here about, but they are tied directly to gaming revenue being used for other addictions and stuff like that. Whether it's right to try or anything like that.
Nick, I'm going to have to,
Yeah.
we really are on a time constraint.
So okay, you know what?
I just want you to speak to the bill.
Yeah. As you use your legislative hammer, please don't use it to entice people who want to join FanDuel or any online gaming to bet on people who kick around balls so that they could come to Kansas, so we could produce even more income on the backs of those who engage in this behavior, and now would seem to want to prey on the lower income folks through temptation and enticement by having them bet more often and in bigger amounts so they could get deductions. Thank you, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Nick, and it's great to see you again. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Nick. Very much appreciate it. Are there any other proponents? Any opponents? Any neutral? We'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 226. We'll open the hearing on House Bill 2275. Thank you, Amelia.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill number 2275 relates to sales and compensating use tax and would provide a countywide retailer sales tax authority for Finney County. The bill would provide Finney County the authority to submit a proposition to the electors to impose a countywide retailer sales tax at a rate of 0.5% and pledging the revenue received therefrom for the purposes of financing the construction or remodeling of a courthouse, jail, law enforcement center facility, or other county administrative facility. Revenues generated by this tax would be retained by the county and expended only for the purposes of the revenue as pledged. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the Kansas Register, and the bill passed the House on February 20th of 2025 on a vote of 118-4. And I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Our first conferee is Representative Pishney. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I appreciate being here. I was here a few years ago asking for forgiveness on a tax oversight in Finney County. This time I'm asking for permission. Because counties are extension of state government in statute, we must come and ask for permission to allow our voters to vote about a sales tax issue. This is not a request for a sales tax, but a request to vote, to allow our voters to vote on a sales tax. And as was stated with the review of the bill, it is to build a new jail. It is to redo our law enforcement center into an administrative center in Finney County. The tax revenue would be pledged for that purpose, and the sunset for the sales tax increase would be at the time of the completion of those projects. So I am here as a former county commissioner, former being I resigned my position when I came into the House in January. We have been working on this project in Finney County for over a year. It's probably a $60 million project plus maybe, and we want to use the sales tax tool to fund this absolute need rather than burdening our property tax owners anymore with tax revenues. So As you heard, it did pass in the House, and we would ask for consideration for it to pass in the Senate. So with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for questions.
So thank you. When do you plan on putting this on the ballot for the voters?
We would like to have it on the ballot this fall, in November, I believe.
November. Not a special election?
It would not be a special election, no.
Glad to
But
hear that.
I believe you have our current county chair who will be joining by WebEx in a minute. I don't know if any changes to that have taken place in my absence from the county commission, but that's what I understand at this point.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next conferee, Senator Clifford. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for accommodating me this morning. You'll hear from Chairman Schultz next. He'll give you the details and hopefully answer the questions you have. But I want you to know I went through the law enforcement center Saturday night with Sergeant Cole, who was on duty. The building's disgusting. Ceilings are falling down all over. You have a picture from Chairman Schultz, but that doesn't represent just 1/10 of 1% of what's going on. I mean, it hasn't rained out there for weeks, and there are leaks from the ceiling. So we've got plumbing problems. We have exposures. I was in an evidence room where there were tarps over evidence lockers. I mean, and over sensitive electronic equipment. And this isn't even under the jail. The jail, with the wisdom of the period 50 years ago, was built above the offices for security's sake. That's been a great mistake, given that, as you well know, it all runs downhill. So when toilets get blocked or prisoners do what they tend to do in incarceration, the offices below are virtually uninhabitable. The police department's fed up. They're actually moving out in September to temporary quarters. And all of us are anxious for this to get on the ballot. Obviously, the citizens will weigh in as appropriate, but I do support 2275. I'll stand for questions, and I'm happy to stay.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions? Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Clifford. I had a quick question. You feel there's not enough money in the coffers today and that this is required, just from your opinion of your area, that the additional taxes is something that's needed?
So from a prior bond issue in 2017, we're just finishing Phase 5, which is a joint police, fire, and EMS facility. Of a huge facility we'll dedicate in May. We also have an EMS health department building that is already funded by the county. So I would say the resources are stretched in order to provide the appropriate services. This has been literally festering for quite an amount of time. So I think the will is there for the joint effort of the city and the county. Half the sales tax in Finney County is paid by non-residents, non-state residents, non-county residents, and this jail facility in particular will serve regional needs. Ulysses, Kansas, Grant County just turned down a jail bond. They've got a dated jail they can hardly use, so this facility really will serve regional needs in southwest Kansas.
Thanks for your perspective. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. For
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gerald Schultz, WebEx, Finney County. Gerald, we just have a couple of minutes, and I apologize for the short amount of time.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think I would ask the conferees of your committee and yourself to review the written materials that have been submitted. We have this request that is not a want but a need. And I think that the representatives from Southwest Kansas have adequately addressed the issues and the planning that has gone into this request. We think that we have the laboring oar in front of the electorate in November, and we ask for the committee to favorably pass this out to the full Senate, and hopefully when it becomes law, we can build a new bright law enforcement center remodel, that we can build a new jail to serve the needs for all of Southwest Kansas, but including Finney County for the next 40 years. I know that folks read stuff when it's submitted to you, and so I won't try to belabor that, and I will stand for questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Schultz, committee, any questions? Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your being brief, and we will read over the written testimony. Committee, there's written proponent by Jay Hall. Is there any other person that would like to testify as a proponent? As an opponent? Neutral. Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2275, and we'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 259.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 259 relates to income tax and would provide for future income tax rate decreases contingent on exceeding certain inflation-adjusted revenues. The bill would provide for possible decreases in income tax rates based on a formula that calculated based on whether general revenue fund collections for the prior fiscal year exceed the adjusted base year revenues with a calculated increase for inflation. On August 15 of each year, the Director of Budget would determine if there was an excess of what is termed an adjusted general revenue fund collections, which is defined as the actual tax revenues to the state general fund. If there was an excess of that amount for the previous year when compared to the inflation-adjusted base year revenues, if in the event there was an excess, the amount of the excess would be converted into an income tax rate reduction to go into effect for the following tax year. Individual income tax rates would first be decreased until both brackets were at 4.5%. Once the individual income tax rates were reached 4.5%, any further decreases would be applied to the surtax on corporations until the combined normal and surtax rates on corporations equaled 4.5%. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your last phrase, I didn't understand that. The surtax from Commerce, can you explain how that?
Madam Chair, income tax rates on corporations are structured a little differently than income tax rates for individuals. And so currently for corporations, there is what is termed in the statute a normal tax on Kansas taxable income of a corporation. And that normal tax is an amount, I believe, is currently 3.5. Is that the one that was adjusted? I think it was the normal tax, the adjusted tax. I'm trying to think. The statute reads 4%, but because of the apex adjustment, it's actually 3.5%, the normal tax. There is also then added a surtax, which is 3% of Kansas taxable income on the amount of income that is in excess of $50,000. So there's actually two components. Depending on the corporation's income, there could be two rates applicable.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is ask Eddie to put a paragraph explaining how corporate tax, privilege tax, and income tax in Kansas. So that would help, Senator.
So, Madam Chair, so if that's higher than 4.5, once it would get down to 4.5, we would buy that down, or?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee? Thank you, Amelia. Committee, we've started a little bit of a new process just for those turning in testimony, LIFO, last in, first out. So last ones that turn in their testimony are going first. Dennis Hall. Yeah. It's in order to help John. He is putting these packets together with very limited time. So we are asking that you get your testimony in 24 hours in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I was originally here for the House bill yesterday until somebody told me last afternoon that the Senate was considering the same bill. So I'm happy we changed our flights and we stayed. But I am State Affairs Manager with Americans for Tax Reform, and I'm very happy to be here. And we are here to express enthusiastic support for SB 259, or really any income tax cuts or triggers that you guys will consider in the last few weeks of this session. I'd first like to applaud you for moving to 5.58% last year. This means hundreds of millions of dollars are already flowing from the unproductive public sector back into the productive hands of entrepreneurs, families, small businesses, individuals who basically are keeping the dollars that they earned. And it's important to note that small businesses do file under the personal side of the tax code, so any cuts that you make here would benefit small businesses all across your state. But by passing this bill today, you'd be basically sending up a gigantic bat signal to those businesses or people around the country who are looking to relocate. This bill tells those prospective new residents that Kansas lawmakers are prioritizing them and their pocketbooks. They can be confident in this legislation's promise that the state will restrain its growth year over year, and in return, their tax burden will continue to ratchet down dollar by dollar. Importantly, you would most certainly not be alone if you enacted this revenue trigger. In fact, much of the country is quickly pulling ahead on competitive tax policy. Over the last decade, at least 8 states have enacted various forms of trigger language. We're happy to get those bills to you or even connect you with some of the people who have worked on those bills in other states if it can be helpful. But some, like Kentucky and West Virginia, eventually trigger all the way to 0. Others have been triggering for years. The prime example is North Carolina, which got this movement going in 2013. They started in the high 7s for their income and corporate tax rates, and they are in the mid-4s today thanks to their revenue triggers. This is the steady, responsible progress that you get when you restrain state spending to whatever figure you choose, and in this case it would be inflation, and take all the rest of that money and put it towards permanent income tax rate reduction. North Carolina is on the way to 2.49%, and there are some people who would like to go to 0 after that, but they are now ranked #1 best state in the country for business, and we believe that's no accident. Other successful revenue trigger states include Georgia, Indiana, and Louisiana, which used special session last year to cut their 4.4% progressive income tax system down to a 3% flat tax, which took effect on January 1st, and they're hoping to do further triggers from there. You could also look east to Missouri, where Governor Kehoe is leading a charge on trigger legislation of their own that will eventually go all the way to 0. And across the country, we're seeing legislation in at least 10 states that we do expect to be signed into law or passed over the veto of a governor in some cases. But that's a fifth of the country right there. And if you count up all the states that have a single rate tax or a 0 income tax, which 8 states currently have, now that New Hampshire joined the ranks on January 1st, that's 23 states with a flat income tax. I'm sorry, Kansas would become the 23rd state with a flat income tax if this bill were to pass and you did trigger to 4.5, but that's half the country, and that makes a real difference, not just in the other states that are looking to the flat and 0 income tax states and trying to do something themselves, but hopefully eventually on the national level as well. So this is all historic progress. We're elated to see Kansas once again consider meaningful income tax relief and also the meaningful spending restraint that makes these tax cuts possible at the end of the day. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dennis, and appreciate it. And you've been very helpful on providing data and information for Kansas. I thank you guys very much. Any questions, committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Alex Oral. Welcome, Alex.
Good morning, committee. Madam Chair, Alex Oral, Senior Vice President, Government Relations for the Kansas Bankers Association. Appreciate the previous conferees, very detailed analysis, and I'm going to tell you he's more of an expert on the total bill than I am. And for brevity purposes, I know we're short on time. I'm going to talk about one piece of the bill that's not actually in the bill. But before I do that, I want to actually say thank you to this committee for the work they have done on all tax policy over the last couple of years, including support for the privilege tax last year and the inclusion in the special session bill. In Kansas banks are not subject to Kansas corporate income tax. We are subject to what's called the Kansas privilege tax. That is our income tax. The legislature set that more than 2 decades ago to reflect the difference in taxation for Kansas banks pay taxes on U.S. or income from U.S. Treasury agency and securities when other corporations do not. So that's why the difference in taxation is there. And now this is where it gets a little confusing. I'm asking for help, Madam Chair, from Amelia and Eddie over there of how do you put a privilege tax trigger in the bill? It's not included in this bill, not because of opposition. Banks are businesses too. We are subject to a different income tax rate. But how do you put that into statute? And on page 3 and 4 of my testimony, you'll actually see a grid. Bankers love spreadsheets. And so you'll see 3 pages of that, of how you would lower from if you're taking the corresponding rate reduction on corporate income, so if you went from 6.5 to 6.4, that's a 1.54% reduction. So applying that same 1.54% reduction to the total rate for banks, and then the total rate for trust and savings and loans, and that's where you get that new total rate. Now, the bank rate, just like income or corporate income, is 2-tiered. There's a surtax and a normal rate. In the legislation last year in special session, the reduction was applied to the normal rate. So we would be requesting, if this committee does move forward with this bill, allowing us to work with the revisers and folks of how do you put this into statute? Do you just put a chart in statute? We have done that before with unemployment insurance and other types of issues, but if there's a better way to do it, I am all ears and always willing to learn. So, Madam Chair, appreciate the opportunity and thank you for your time.
So thank you, Alex. I'm going to ask you a question. When income tax on LLCs and sole proprietorships went to 0, you came in and said the privilege tax, we need to be part of that. So you were part of that. Then you came in with the Apex bill and said we need to be part of the corporate income tax. So which are you? You can't eat your cake and have your cake and eat it too.
The one on the predates me, Madam Chair, so I don't remember that position or whether we actually had a KBA official position. I do not know that
did.
for a fact. So
A year later, yeah,
okay, so back in 2013.
13.
Okay, that predates me, Madam Chair, but I will go back and do my research on that. What I've been directed to do is when it's tied to corporate income tax is my
We'll be glad to get you in there. I just want to know which way you want to be.
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Alex. Eric Stafford, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. I'm Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber and appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 259 today. Dennis went through kind of what some of the other states are doing, so I'll skip over those comments that I had as well in our testimony. But this bill that we put together is modeled off of North Carolina and West Virginia. 2 states, West Virginia more recently in 2023, but North Carolina was kind of the first in 2013, and they've taken their top rate from 7.7 down to 4.25 with further reductions on the way. I was asked yesterday, well, what's their budget situation? And 2024, 2025, they had a $1.4 billion surplus. So they are the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing states in the nation. But when we look at our neighboring states and then their neighboring states totaling 16 states, we are the second highest income tax rate out of those 16 states behind New Mexico at 558 is where we're at. So really, in our view, it's about competitiveness. It's about how we can attract investment and workforce talent. Back in January, the Tax Foundation released an article titled Americans Move to Low-Tax States in 2024, and those states that are leading the nation in in-migration are South Carolina, Texas, North Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee. The fastest out-migration, no surprise, California, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, high-tax states. So the answer is that money walks, and we want to attract money to Kansas, and you have to do that in a way where individuals considering where to move to and businesses considering where to invest or helping businesses that are already here expand and add more jobs. You have to do that in a way that especially families look at how expensive it is to live in that state. Tax Foundation just this morning saw an email before our breakfast that showed state by state and county by county property taxes. Kansas has the 14th highest property tax burden according to the Tax Foundation. You can break that data down county by county if you want to. But overall, taxes are high. Car registrations, but they all of it matters. The good news is that we have a chart that shows that we are a top state for the cost of doing business in the country. We're, I can't remember, 13th maybe, or top 10. Off the top of my head, I don't recall. But our tax burden, when you look at our comparative states from the Tax Foundation, that's the second chart that's on our testimony, you'll see that we're just not very competitive, especially on the corporate income tax side. So this bill does draw down personal and corporate. Other states are looking to do the same, and other states have done the same. Over 30 states have cut income taxes, including Kansas last year. Modest cuts, but what last year did was it put the structure in place to make it easy for you guys to go ahead and move to a single rate. And in our view, this is the most responsible way to do it. It does it completely opposite of how we've always looked at it, where we look at lowering rates and we wait for the research department to get us a fiscal note and figure out how to manage the budget after the fact. How this trigger works is it has the baseline revenue number that you start with, and that right now that's 10 billion, 3,800,000 roughly and change. That's your baseline receipts. As inflation grows, so 2.2%, you are allowed to increase spending 2.2%. If you bring in 6% of receipts, you have that 3.8% difference in revenues that you must spend down on property taxes until you get to a single rate of 4.5% on the individual side, and then the trigger kicks over onto the corporate income tax side. If we hit a recession, and every year that baseline revenue number resets. As inflation happens year over year over year, that number goes higher. When we hit a recession, or if we're just very stagnant and our receipts don't meet that number plus inflation plus excess, nothing happens. You guys are not locked in for rate reductions. So it's protecting you guys from recessionary periods, from being forced to cut rates that get put into statute later down the road that you have no idea what will happen with the budget. So it's a way to do it that protects the states. It's working well in the states that have done it. Again, you've seen North Carolina pretty much have their personal income tax. Their corporate income tax is almost to zero. They're down to 2%. That's scheduled to phase out here shortly. We're not asking you to go to zero like West Virginia and Louisiana and some other states are looking to do. We're just asking you to go to 4.5%. We believe that's a very competitive position to try to get to. That would put us in the top half. And I think we just need to take baby steps in how to get there. And this is a good, responsible way to get there. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time, but we appreciate your support for Senate Bill 259.
Thank you, Eric. Committee, any questions? Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you. And thank you, Eric, for coming. And you guys analyze this stuff, and I just sat here and watch. So what are states with no income tax? They've got governments. I know the government may be smaller than ours, but I know there are still some states that tax machinery and equipment, some states that tax inventory, some states that tax cattle. We've exempted all of that. So where do these states get their revenue? If they don't have any income tax, and their property tax is lower than ours.
Sales tax depends on the state. Sales tax, property taxes, I mean, again, that citing the Tax Foundation article that came out this morning on where do states rank on property taxes. Texas is 7th. So they're the 7th highest, but they're now toying with the idea of trying to find a way to either reduce or eliminate property taxes. They already did I don't even remember the total. I think it was like $16 billion property tax relief, where the state basically just gave rebates to taxpayers for their property taxes. They cut property taxes significantly. We have some family down there that I think received $5,000 or $6,000 from back in property taxes. So it depends on the source. Tourism for Florida, obviously, sales tax, very heavy focused on sales tax. So in terms of an apples to apples comparison, I don't know, but I can tell you that all taxes in Kansas are not competitive. We tax vehicles. Most states don't tax vehicles. You have registration fees, but to pay property taxes on them, I don't think that's very common. We're top 10 there. We're 12th in the nation in terms of our cell phone taxes. So, yeah, all the same sources.
Any questions on the bill? Okay, thank you. Tanner, do you have any new information to add? You got about 1 minute. We need the opponents to be able to speak.
Got it. You got it. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I will skip through some of the nitty gritty in there because, the couple other proponents that spoke on it did a really good job. I would just say a few points here. This bill is transparent for our taxpayers. The budget director will check if the revenue exceeds the inflation adjusted base year. So if it does, the director will certify the amount to the Secretary of Revenue. This ensures the tax cuts are based on actual financial performance, promoting fiscal responsibility. This layer of transparency will also allow the people within the state to see when the state succeeds. They will as well with additional money in their pockets. We constantly talk about how we see talent leave to other states and how to retain them. One of the trends we see with that is that they're leaving to states with lower income taxes and lower cost of living. States like Eric mentioned, like Texas, Oklahoma, and even Colorado has a lower income tax burden than what we have in Kansas. So we have heard from both sides of the aisle the willingness to help lower the cost of Kansans, and we feel that this is a crucial step towards that goal, and for those reasons, we urge the committee to support this bill.
Thank you, Tanner. Committee, our next up is Leah Filter. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here as an opponent. I will not read my testimony, but I will note that our legislative policy that's adopted by our members opposes arbitrary caps on revenue, such as a tax lid on income tax. What I do want to also note is that we have heard from legislators on both sides of the aisle that the number one issue you heard about when you were campaigning was property tax relief. And so we urge the committee to focus on balanced tax relief that doesn't harm in revenue for public schools. And
thank you, Leah. And this
you.
committee has done work on property tax relief. It's so frustrating when people insinuate that we have not. So
my apologies, I didn't intend to imply that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Leah? Seeing none, thank you. Donna Ginther. Welcome back to the Tax Committee. It's been a year or two.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Donna Ginther. I'm a professor of economics, and I direct the Institute for Policy and Social Research. And I'm here in my capacity as the academic advisor to the Governor's Tax Reform Council. Although the fiscal note on this bill is low or non-existent at this time, I'm giving negative testimony because it adds permanent constraints to the current budget and relies on accurately forecasting stable revenues for many years to come. I have several points that this bill creates. First, it creates permanent tax reductions in response to temporary tax revenue increases. So it only works in one direction. If revenue goes up, say a corporation pays a lot of expected taxes, that could push you past the limit. You have a recession the next year, you're going to have to work to balance the budget and make significant cuts. It will make it difficult for the state to maintain essential services during economic downturns, and it reduces the flexibility you need to address other aspects of the tax code, such as property taxes or sales taxes. It is contrary to the goals of economic development. Basically, what this bill is assuming is that growth is only being adjusted to inflation. Population growth, what if you have an increase in the overall size of the state? So it's very pessimistic. We're only going to grow with inflation. If we have population increases, such as the demand for increased workers at the Panasonic plant, you're not going to adjust for that level of growth, and you're going to be cutting the amount of tax revenue you're taking in when there's an increase in demand for services. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about competitiveness in this with respect to this bill, and 18 months ago, I did a report for the Board of Regents about competitiveness. We looked at salaries for highly skilled workers in Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and we found that for many important occupations, Kansas pays the least. So for computer scientists, average wages in Kansas are $88,000 compared to $108,000 in Colorado. That's adjusting for the cost of living differences. Same for life scientists. They pay $64,000 in Kansas and $73,000 in Texas. Engineers, $90,000 in Kansas and $104,000 in Texas. So what you see is to increase competitiveness in terms of attracting workers, our companies need to pay competitive wages. People move for good jobs. Does this bill create good jobs? I don't think so. If you look at what happened during the Brownback tax cuts, we cut all of our benefits for promoting entrepreneurship. And as a result, you saw the amount of entrepreneurial activity in this state fall, where it increased after the Great Recession in other states. So in summary, one other point is that by capping this at the 2024 level in terms of the budget, you are assuming that there's not anything that's underfunded. And I'm aware that other things such as special education has not met its funding requirements since 2011. Other underfunded programs include early childhood education, broadband, healthcare services. To summarize, we like to lower rates and broaden the base. There's no broadening of the base in this bill. Tax collections do not take into account potential court-ordered spending like we had for K through 12 spending for a number of years. And it doesn't account for population and growth. Overall, I urge you to think carefully about this bill and consider the implications going forward. Thank you. I'll stand for questions now.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? I have a quick one, Donna. I just read an article this weekend that said lower corporate income taxes result in higher salaries for employees.
Oh, who wrote that?
I read it.
Who wrote it?
I'm looking it up. I'll get that information.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I searched for the article.
So what we've seen in the literature is that when you give corporations tax breaks, they tend to put it more into investment as opposed to wages. So that's
not what this article implied, and so we're actually going to do some research on it with the recent corporate income taxes that we had in Kansas.
That'd be very interesting to see that.
I think so too. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next conferee is Nathan Kessler. And my apologies, Nathan, we're about out of time.
Yeah, no problem. I just testified on this yesterday in House, so if you guys want my full statement, you can go to that video. I just want to actually take a moment to address just some of the things that have been brought up, like Senator Schallenberger's question regarding where do they get their money, or the budget situation in North Carolina. Let's actually start with that budget, because while it is true that they are going to see $1 billion in surplus this year and a good surplus next year, beginning in fiscal 27, their revenues are actually going to begin to decline. They're expecting an $800 million decline from fiscal year 26 to fiscal year 27. And that is in concert with the growth that they're expecting. So that is all factored in. And so those are sort of the issues that you have with the flat taxes, that eventually there's a point where you no longer are able to sustain a budget. I would also say that I don't know why we would want to compare ourselves to North Carolina or West Virginia, or really any other state per se, because we're Kansas. And if we look at some of the data from the census, we're actually doing pretty well in Kansas. Our median household income is higher than that of North Carolina or Kansas. Our poverty rate is lower, and our labor force participation rate is significantly higher. So the way it looks right now, our economy, while our growth may not be quite as robust as in North Carolina, for example, our economy is, it stands up against them any day of the week. Finally, looking at where they get their revenue, because I think this is really important. If we go about narrowing the tax base through income tax cuts, we're going to have to make up that revenue somewhere. And if we look at North Carolina as the example that I'm going to use here, license taxes for just a base, they have a 3.5x population compared to us. Their license taxes are 21 times our license taxes. Corporations specifically is 63 times higher. Other license taxes at 15. Alcoholic beverage taxes at 8.8 times higher, and motor fuel taxes 5.1 times higher. So it's just these sorts of things. They do have other taxes. They do have revenue. It's just about who's going to get the biggest cut and where you're going to cut at. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Nathan. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Is there any proponent, opponent, or neutral testimony? And if so, you can submit it written and we will get it distributed to the committee. Committee, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 259. Is there any other business to be brought before us? Committee, we will be working this bill later this week. I just wanted to give you a heads up, along with Senate Bill 215 and 73. And other bills possibly heard, House bills. Is there any other business to be brought before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.